My name is Robb Miller. I'm the SVP of sales for a company called Elgonomy. Elgonomy is a customer data platform and personalization software as a service platform that's built for retail. We work a great deal with quick service restaurants, with online grocers and physical grocers, with retailers, broadly speaking, that are in perhaps clothing or cosmetics or really almost any item you can buy online. We are based globally. So both Rich Relevance and Manthan, which are now Algonomy, have been in business for 13 years. Our headquarters are currently split between San Francisco and Bangalore, India. But we have offices in Europe, we have offices in Latin America, and offices throughout Asia Pacific. Initially met Salesforce Europe when I was running sales for a company called Livefyre back in 2013 timeframe. And we used the service to do our initial expansion into the European market. Like many companies, we started in the UK, but then we very quickly went into Europe more broadly. We also opened offices and established a presence in Australia and Brazil and Latin America using their service. So we went in, I think, a period of 18 months from just 2 people on the team to 10. And I've continued to use the service since. I hired Salesforce Europe when I came on board at Rich Relevance 3 years ago to help us augment our teams in Latin America and Brazil, but also Mexico. And certainly have been thinking about doing other expansion into Europe as well. We've used several different services from Salesforce Europe, including hiring outside account executives who are in market, speak the local language, bring a Rolodex of contacts. We've used Salesforce Europe also to bring on board demand gen people and platforms so that we've been able to seed those markets with strong leads. And we've used Salesforce Europe to hire some technical sales or sales engineering resources in a couple of different markets. When I first worked with Salesforce Europe, it was to help us expand from a standing start. We only had people really in North America, and we were struggling, frankly, to get abroad and to gain any traction. But recently, we've used them to augment current teams. So the company I'm with now already has a base of operations in Sweden and in London, but we've wanted to add people in different markets, and we've done that through SFE. So we have a hybrid model where we've got some full-time hires where it makes sense, and where we bring in Salesforce Europe personnel where that makes sense. Generally speaking, SFE provides a lot more flexibility. It lowers the risk in terms of cost and in some ways time to market, just because we're working with a team that's already established, bringing a Rolodex, and perhaps knows our space as well. One thing that I think people don't often consider when they're looking at outsourcing any service, but in particular sales, is how is this resource going to act and behave if they're not really part of my team? But one thing that I've always done with Salesforce Europe, and anyone, of course, that I would hire, but even an outsource service, is to treat those personnel as though they were full-time hires, as though they were on the team. As I've told people in the past, the only difference between how I treat someone that's working for me from Salesforce Europe versus who's a full-time hire is how they're paid. It's just through a different mechanism, but otherwise they are trained, treated, and exposed to the product and to our customers in exactly the same way. The nice thing about working with Salesforce Europe is they do bring management expertise. So there are regional sales leadership that help me get a grasp on how other folks or how people on that team are performing, and making sure that they do things as rudimentary as keeping the CRM updated, but also helping me understand forecasts. And when it comes time to hire additional resources, finding the right person. So from that perspective, I think their customer service has been great, because I know that I'm not just out there doing it on my own, that I've got a local resource, and more than that, a local leader, someone who's got a lot of experience under their belt to help. My initial experience with Salesforce Europe, we went from zero to, well, I should say we went from about 10% of our annual recurring revenue coming from international markets to 40% in about 18 months. So that was pretty significant at the time, because we were, already doing 10 million plus in revenue at that particular startup. Lately, actually, one thing that I think is interesting is that for Latin America, which is a tricky market given the current economic climate, not even including COVID, is that we've been able to maintain a steady growth path in our annual recurring revenue. So for example, year on year, I set a goal for us to be basically doubling the amount of ARR we were gathering from any particular client there. And we've maintained that even as we've shifted from some full-time hires to Salesforce Europe resources. In my opinion, there's really no better way to handle international sales expansion for a startup or for any company that's trying to lower the risk on the enterprise, whether that be in time spent or money spent, than to use a service like Salesforce Europe. It has helped me tremendously test the waters, whether that be through demand generation alone or demand generation plus field sales, than to use their service. It's helped us go into markets that we otherwise might have been, too afraid to go into, where the costs and the risks might have been too high. It's also, helped me a couple of times learn what markets I should avoid, frankly, without going through the painful exercise, perhaps, of hiring someone and then having to maybe, wind that person down. So Salesforce Europe, for my money, for anyone that's in a startup environment, is 100% the best way to go.